We studied this past week parts of the life of Moses. Moses really is an interesting character in Scripture. And on day one of Vacation Bible School, we saw that Moses is supposed to die as a baby. That's because the Israelites had come to Egypt during a really harsh famine because God had allowed Joseph to travel there and as a slave. He was sold by his brothers into slavery, and that's one of Jacob's sons, one of Israel's sons, and he became the person in charge of all the food in Egypt to preserve them throughout the famine. And so he's the one over that. And so when he is allowed to bring his family up to Egypt to save them during the famine, they weren't a nation yet. The Israelites weren't a nation. They're just a big family. It's only 70 people when they come up at that time. But as they grew, the Pharaoh who was in charge when Joseph was there, he loved Joseph because he saved his people during that time of famine. And so he really loved Joseph. But Joseph dies, the Pharaoh dies, new people come along, new people take over. And so the Israelite family that was once 70 plus one, which was Joseph himself, that 71 people became a massive group of people in Egypt. And the new Pharaoh is scared. They didn't really pose a threat to the Egyptians in any way, but he thought they could at some point. At some point, maybe they'll join up with the enemies and maybe something else will go wrong and maybe they'll just take over. And so he comes up with these plans to try to basically thin them out. Kill them, right? Work them to death, those kind of things. Maybe even marry them to Egyptian young men. And that was the last plea there. That was the last resort. And he commands these people. He said, if you find any of the male Israelite babies that are born, throw them in the river. That was the command. And then there would only be Israelite girls. They would marry Egyptian boys. That was his plan. And they'll all become Egyptian after that point in time. And so the Israelites will just disappear. That did not work. Moses' mother, Jochebed, tried to hide him for a few months, but babies start crying a little louder all the time as they get older, and so wasn't able to hide him. And God says, well, you're going to have to follow my instructions, and you're going to have to protect him in this way. And the way that God led her to protect her baby boy was to put him in a little ark, a little basket that she had pitched within and without there to keep it waterproof, and put it on the edge of the Nile River. There, in the flags, in the reeds. And lo and behold, guess who comes along to bathe there at the edge of the Nile River? Pharaoh's daughter. The daughter of the person who had commanded all these babies to be thrown into the river and drowned. She opens up that little ark, doesn't have any idea what's inside. When she sees a baby in there, Moses, right on cue, cries this pitiful cry. And it just breaks her heart. And she can't bring herself to drown it. Just throw it in the river like her father had told him. And so she's planning on keeping it. And Moses' mother had sent his sister Miriam there to see what would happen to baby Moses. And when she realizes that Pharaoh's daughter is attached to that baby, she says, do you want me to call one of the Israelite women, one of the Hebrew women, to get to nurse it for you? Because there are a lot of Israelite or Hebrew women now that have just had babies and have had their babies drowned. So they're able to nurse those young children. And Pharaoh's daughter says, yes. Go get me one to nurse this baby. And guess who she goes and gets? Moses' own mother. And Pharaoh's daughter says, you go nurse this baby for me, and I'll pay you to do it. So Moses' mother gets paid to raise her own child the first few years of his life. And so Moses knows he's an Israelite. But he grows up and he is raised as a prince in Egypt. Now, as prince in Egypt, Moses is very rich. Right? But when Moses is about 40 years old, let's see if the young people remember this. Moses is about 40 years old. He does something really bad. What does he do? Yes. You can just answer out loud. You don't have to raise your hand. He kills an Egyptian. Exactly right. In Exodus chapter 2, if you want to follow along with me, verse 11 and 12, it says, and it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now Moses sees an Egyptian mistreating, beating one of the Israelites, one of the Hebrews, one of his people there, and he looks this way, and he looks that way, and he doesn't see anybody around, and so he kills him, hides his body in the sand there. But soon Pharaoh finds out, and then what does Pharaoh want to do to Moses? Kill him. Kill him. Moses flees to the land of Midian. Right? And when he goes down into the land of Midian, Moses marries a woman there, has such a wonderful life because he gets to work for his father-in-law. Right? Gets to work for his father-in-law as a shepherd. Now, some of you may love your father-in-law. I do. Right? But shepherding is one of the lowest, poorest jobs that exist. Right? Now, you can imagine if I find the absolutely poorest, lowest job possible, right, to take care of my father-in-law's daughter. Right? That's where Moses is at. That's all he's got. And so he's working for his father-in-law. He's tending sheep. And Moses has left the wealth where he was a prince in Egypt for being raised in Pharaoh's own house. And now he's a poor, dirty shepherd. That's what his job is. Right? But he is horrible at it. He's not a good shepherd. God had trained him on purpose in Egypt, in Pharaoh's house, for a specific purpose. If you skip ahead to Exodus 3, verse 1, you'll see just what kind of shepherd Moses really is. He says, now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert. And came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. Who takes your sheep in the desert? Right? I mean, he's just not really good at it. He's trying and he's doing his best, but you try to keep your sheep away from the desert at all possible. You don't try to cross it and all those kind of things. But while he's there with the sheep, there on Mount Horeb, God talks to him in a very special way. How did God talk to Moses in that special way? Yeah.
Talking to him through a fire.
Through a fire in what? What was on fire? Yes. The bush. Yes, it's a burning bush, but that bush is not burning up. In Exodus 3, verse 2 and 3, he says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. So Moses sees this bush. It's on fire, but it's not burning up, and he's curious about it. And so when he gets there, God says, you're on holy ground. Take your shoes off. Right? I'm going to give you a message there. And so God tells Moses, says, you're going to lead my people out of Egypt. You're going to lead the Hebrews, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And they're no longer going to be slaves to the Egyptians. They're going to the land that I promised to your father Abraham years before. And what did Moses say? Well, sure, I'd love to do that, Lord. No, that's not what Moses says at all. Right? In Exodus 3:11, you can read the whole account for yourself, but he starts making excuses and all. And one of them here in Exodus 3:11, and Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh? And that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt. Why would I be qualified for that? Well, where was Moses raised for the first 40 years of his life? Pharaoh's house. He knows all about how Pharaoh deals with things. He knows all about the workings of the government and all those things. If anybody in Israel is qualified to talk to Pharaoh about those things, it's Moses. And he goes on the rest of that and says, well, I don't talk real well, and I'm slow of speech and all that. And God says, no, I made your tongue. I'll take care of you. I'll tell you what to do. But Moses is trying to say, I don't think I'm really the one qualified for that. And God calls us after we're saved to do things like that, and that's the way we act. Well, I'm not really good at this. Well, I can't really talk in front of people, and I can't do those. Yeah, I had all those excuses too, and now you see me. Here I am, right? Not because I got any better, but because God can do things through us. And God gave Moses some miracles to do in front of the people and Pharaoh. One of those was when he threw his stick, his shepherd's staff down on the ground, it turned into what? Snake. When he picked it up by the tail, it turned back into what? Stick. Yes. And so God sends him to talk to Pharaoh there in Egypt and to tell him to let the Israelites go. On day 2, look over in Exodus chapter 5 and verse 1. when Moses mentions this to Pharaoh and shows the miracles that God allowed him to do and says, God says, let my people go. Pharaoh says what? No, I don't think so. Right? In verse 1 and 2 of Exodus 5, he says, and afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And so Pharaoh then accuses the people of having too much free time. Oh, you're supposed to be working. You guys are slaves here. And if you're worried about going on a little vacation out in the wilderness, you've got too much free time. And so it makes their work even harder. And God starts sending plagues. Now, how many plagues were there? Remember? 10. 10 plagues. I'm not going to read all these to you. I'm going to give you the abbreviated version. In Exodus chapter 7, the first one, the water of the Nile River turns to what? Blood. And when it turns to blood, what happens to the fish? They died and then they went stinky. I like that. They died and they went stinky. Right? Pharaoh won't let the people go. In Exodus 8, you see 3 more plagues. The next one's frogs. Frogs in their houses, frogs in their beds, frogs sticking on their body, frogs in their ovens where they were cooking. Frogs are just everywhere. When God takes the frogs away, Moses and Aaron say, God said, let my people go. We took the frogs away, and Pharaoh says, nah, I don't think so. Change my mind again. Right? So we get the next one. God sends lice. Lice. Now, that's more like gnats. More like gnats than head lice that we know. And so the dust of the ground becomes these gnats. They're on the people. They're on the animals. They're just annoying them to no end. Same thing. Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to let them go. So God makes it a little worse. Right? Then the flies come. I noticed when we were leaving out to church this morning there on the front door, I think Cindy and Dwayne and them was there around the front door, and the flies was just everywhere. And you stay outside. We don't want you inside. They aggravate the life out of you. Right? You can imagine swarms and swarms of flies are in Egypt, but now God does something different. Right? Before, the Egyptians and the Israelites are having to deal with all these inconveniences and the river and the frogs and the gnats and all that. But now God says, no, I'm going to separate them. Right? The Israelites are living in the land of Goshen. He says, I'm going to make the flies everywhere else. But there's no need for my people to continue to suffer with these things. Right? The Egyptians are the ones that are refusing to follow God's commands, and so why should God's people suffer anymore? And so the plagues then just start affecting the Egyptians, and the Israelites don't have to suffer. You look over in Exodus chapter 9, you see another 3 plagues. First is a murrain of the animals, which is a deadly disease. Their animals start dying there. Their cattle, that's horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep, all those kind of things start getting this disease, and they just start falling over. Some of you guys are farmers and you raise cattle and different type of animals, and when an animal dies of disease, what do you do with it? Well, you don't chop it up and serve it for dinner. You bury it somewhere and hope nothing else gets it. And so they can't even use it to any degree. They have all these animals that are dying. Then Pharaoh still won't let them go. Next comes the boils, sores all over their bodies. If you've ever had, my father-in-law had one boil, just one. He wasn't covered from head to toe like Job in the Bible or nothing like that. He had one. And he said that was the most miserable experience to try to it was just hard to deal with. There's no relief from it and it hurts all the time. And these people are not just one boil, they're covered with boils, and their animals too. And still Pharaoh says no. God says, well, I'm going to send a hailstorm. Not just any hailstorm, but it's going to be so bad, this hailstorm, that if you don't have your animals inside somewhere, they're going to die. And that whether that's, most of them didn't have room to put all their animals in a barn, those type of structures, and so many of them, they had to put them in their houses to bring them in to keep them from dying from the hailstorm. And some of the Egyptians finally got smart. When Moses says, there's going to be a hailstorm and your animals are going to die, some of them put their animals in their houses and things to keep them from dying. But Pharaoh still doesn't change his mind. So we get, in Exodus 10, we get 2 more plagues. The next one is locusts. Now that hail destroyed some of the food along with it that had already come up. But some of it was spared. It hadn't popped out of the ground yet. But when the locusts come, They just eat nearly everything green. I mean, just nearly everything that's left is just consumed. Right? The crops that weren't destroyed by the hail, the locusts eat them. And then the ninth one there, God causes darkness on the land for 3 days. 3 days it's dark, day and night. Everywhere except Goshen, where God's people are. In their houses, they had light. Everybody else doesn't have light anywhere. Not in their house, not outside. And they just sit still for 3 days, hoping for it to go away. Right? We didn't have any lights in here on Friday evening for Vacation Bible School. Right? And so we were hoping the kids would sit still because it started getting real warm in here real quick. And we did our devotion. We went back and had a little snack, and then we went out and played with the water of the Duncan booth and cooled off. But no, it was dark. Pharaoh still won't let them go. And so Moses gives this final warning. God's people had to do something very unpleasant, though, for that 10th plague. What did they have to do? You remember? What did they have to kill?
They had to kill a baby lamb.
A baby lamb, right? Less than a year old. They had to kill it, right? When they shed its blood, they took a branch. What was that branch called? Do you remember? Yeah. Hyssop. Yeah, it was a hyssop. And they dip it in that blood, and they had to put it where? Yeah. The sides of the door and on the lintel on the top. Right? And then they had to go in their house. They had to eat that lamb. And anyone that didn't, when God passed through the land at midnight, He sends the angel down and He kills the firstborn of every household that doesn't have the blood of the lamb applied there. That was the picture of Jesus Christ. And if they didn't follow God's instructions, the firstborn died. Not just the people, the firstborn of animals. There's death everywhere. When that happens, Pharaoh just says, just leave, just get out. The Egyptians wanted them gone so bad at that point, they give them their jewelry, they give them silver, they give them gold, says just go, whatever you need to do. Right? And so Pharaoh sends them out. On day 3, look at Exodus chapter 14, verse 2. Day 3, God is going to lead His people through a wilderness land. That's a barren type land. It doesn't have lush green plants and life. It doesn't have creeks and streams and rivers and all kinds of nice water things. It's a place that's almost completely dead. Right? And so when they're leading them through there, God is going to somehow protect them, feed them, and water them. How is God going to lead them through the wilderness? Anybody know? Yeah.
Smoke by day and fire by night.
Well, a pillar of cloud by day, yes. The pillar of cloud, yeah, it looked kind of like smoke, but it's a pillar of cloud by day, and it's a pillar of fire by night. Yes, and God's going to steer them. Now, the Israelites, there's estimated about 1.5 million, 2 million people to lead through the wilderness and protect and feed and water. So they are going to have to follow exactly where God leads them to be spared. And so that pillar of cloud there by day and the pillar of fire by night, that was important because it could give them some shade. The pillar of cloud by day could give them some shade, and then at night, of course, it gives them light and some warmth, that too. And so God is doing exactly what they need there. And God is leading them to their new home in the land of Canaan. And God does something really strange, Charlie. You remember what that was? Instead of steering them just straight over to the land of Canaan, God takes that cloud and He goes out a little ways and He turns them back around and He turns them where? You remember, because they get stuck there. What is it, Mason?
I think it's the Red Sea.
The Red Sea. He goes out, they seem like they're going the right direction, and He turns them back in, they're not even out of the sight of the Egyptians yet. And they come back and they're dead ending in the Red Sea. Right? And that's what happens. The Egyptians can still see Him. In Exodus 14, 2-4, He says, "Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon, before ye shall encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord." And they did so. So God's going to prove Himself, not just to His own people, but to the Egyptians also there, because they need to be saved also. And so Pharaoh sees them, and it looks like they're tangled up in the land. They're going around in circles, seems like, and Pharaoh says, "Hey, what in the world were we doing? Why in the world did we turn our workforce, free workforce, loose? Right? They're tangled up in the wilderness. Let's just go get them and bring them back, put them back to work, and end this foolishness now. And so the Israelites were slaves. You got young people remember that. The Israelites were slaves, but they weren't allowed to have what? Weapons. Right? Slaves aren't allowed to have weapons. They didn't want them turning on them. There's too many of them. And so when the Egyptian army comes after them, the Israelites panic. Right? It looks bad. Right? We don't have any way. We got a whole bunch of people, but we don't have any weapons to. Even if we wanted to fight, we couldn't, and didn't really know how to either. And so they're facing this army there of this skilled Egyptian army, and they've got all kinds of weapons. One of their most important weapons was something they rode on. What was that? The chariots. The chariots. That was a huge advantage in that day for the armies there. And so, but God says, no, I'm going to take care of you. Right? The people start panicking. They whined to Moses and said, oh, you just brought us out here in the wilderness to die. We're stuck here. The Egyptian army's coming. We're just going to die. And God says, no, you just watch. Right? I'm gonna take care of you. In Exodus 14, 13, and 14, he says, and Moses said unto the people, fear ye not. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will shew to you this day. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And God takes that pillar of cloud, pillar of fire that he was leading them by, and he takes it. Instead of it being in front of them now, what does he do with it?
In front of the Egyptians.
He moves it around in front of the Egyptians, between them and the Egyptians. And God says, no, I'm not going to let them get to you. And I'm going to do something special here. Right? And Moses takes his staff, and God says, stretch it out over the sea. And immediately what happens? What happens to the water of the sea? It's a wall on each side of the Red Sea. Just piles up in a big wall on each side. But the ground is still wet, still soggy, still muddy. And so God causes all night long the wind to blow, dries up the ground real nice. And he tells the Israelites to just go right across, right through the middle of the Red Sea. Right? And so he goes across, right? But the Egyptian army and the Pharaoh, they decide, well, if they can go through the middle of the sea, what? We can too. We can too. And they start off through the middle, and God does something miraculous, though. Exodus 14:25, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And so the wheels start falling off the chariots. They can't get any way. They're stuck, and they say, we got to get out of this. This is going to be bad. Right? And so they turn, they try to run away, and God says, Moses, stretch out your staff again across the waters, and immediately the waters do what? They come crashing down, drown the whole Egyptian army there in the middle. In verse 30, thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore, their bodies washed up on the shore. Why was that so important? Yeah. They didn't have weapons before. Now they've got weapons. All of those military men had weapons on them. And so they're going to need that when they go into the land of Canaan. That was day 3. Day 4, God's got to give his people some instructions about how to live, how to love him, how to love each other, how to live in general. And so they come up and they're camped there at the base of this mountain. Anybody remember what that mountain was called? Mount Sinai. Yes, Mount Sinai. Right? And so God says, get ready. On the 3rd day, Moses is going to go up on the mountain. He's going to get these instructions from God. He says the rest of the people cannot go up on the mountain. If they go up on the mountain, what will happen to them? They'll die. Exodus 19:9, and the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. Down in verse 11, he says, and be ready against the 3rd day, for the 3rd day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. Verse 16, And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. In verse 18 and 19, and Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. There's this thick cloud, there's this smoke, there's these thunder, there's lightnings, there's this, the mountain looks like it's on fire, just like the burning bush was, and there's this trumpet sound that keeps getting louder and louder and louder and all those kind of things. What does the mountain look like? What does it look like? It looks like a volcano, an erupting volcano. There's fire and smoke and thunder and lightning, this roaring, this horrible noise, and it's a scary scene, like an erupting volcano. And God tells Moses, I want you to go up there. I want you to go up there, what looks like a live volcano. Right? And there in verse 20 of Exodus 19, and the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. The Lord called Moses up to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Moses gets up to the top of the mountain the first time, and God says, oh, you need to do what?
Go back.
Go back down. Right? Go back down and tell the people what? Don't come up. You're going to die. Right? Moses says, oh, it's okay. I already told them. I already told them once. Right? You don't have to go back. I don't have to go back and tell them down. I told them once before, and God says, no. You go tell them again. It's important to be reminded about God's commandments. That's why we come to church all the time. If you don't come to church very often, when you come back to church, you'll hear something and you say, oh, I forgot that. Oh, I didn't remember that. I didn't do that. And so God sends him back down and says, remind the people of that. And of course the people now know that Moses didn't die when he walked up into what looked like a live volcano. And so he goes down and reminds them. God sends Moses back up on the mountain, and he starts giving him these instructions. There's 10 of them. What do we call those 10 instructions that he gave? The 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments. I'm not going to put you on the spot to say them, but they got all 10 of them last night when we went through that. All 10 of them. The first 4 are commandments about how to love God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt make unto thee no graven image. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. The next 6 are about how to love other people. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not covet anything of thy neighbor's. There, that was day 4. Day 5. Day 5 was an amazing day for us here at Vacation Bible School with no electric. Right, we had all the kids crammed in here for the same time at lesson time, and it's amazing how much they remembered. Matthew chapter 2. On day 5, the 5th day, we moved from Moses' life to the focus of the whole Vacation Bible School. The reason we come to church, period, is to know more about Jesus. Those were pictures from Moses' life, and they're revealed in who Jesus is. Jesus was born a baby, just like Moses was. Just like Moses was. Just as Pharaoh tried to have Moses killed when he was born there along with the other Israelite baby boys. Right? Herod tried to have Jesus killed there when he was born. That's because the wise men came and called him their king. That's in Matthew 2, 1 and 2. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. That's our king. Where's he at? We want to find him. Right? Herod doesn't like that, because Herod's the king. He's the king, the Roman king over that. When Jesus is grown, over in Mark chapter 10, verse 13, Jesus has selected by God's design 12 special disciples, special learners that he is teaching. And they're going to continue after he dies and is resurrected and goes back to heaven. But they're traveling around with him. They're learning as much as they can from Jesus at this time. And Jesus, everywhere he goes, you got to remember, Jesus heals everybody. Right? Anybody that comes to Jesus to be healed, he heals them. He raises some people from the dead along the way. And so people are just flocking to him. Once they figure out he can do those things as God, they're just flocking to him. Some aren't really interested in worshiping God, but they are interested in being healed. Now, they are interested in being healed, and so they just flock to him all the time. People are coming to him. He's trying to teach them along the way and heal them at the same time. And there are some people that say, bring the little children to. They want to bring their little children to Jesus. Have him touch them. Have him hold them. Have him there with him. Right? And Jesus' own disciples, the ones that he are teaching to follow after him. Right? This is what happens in Mark 10:13. And they brought young children to him that he should touch them. And his disciples rebuked those that brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was much displeased, and said unto them, Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of God. Jesus knew, even though he's so busy trying to deal with the adults and trying to heal people and teach them about how to be saved, he knows it's important to teach young people, children, from a young age about the Word of God. Right? That's why it's so important for us to take our children to church, to help them get to know God and accept God before they get older. Moses was given those 10 commandments along with others so they would have them, so they would be able to teach them to their children. That was the whole purpose of having them written down there. I was in youth ministry, Sheila and I, for I believe it was about 23 years before God called me to preach. And so for about 23 years, we did young people's ministry, junior church and teenagers and those kind of things. And I loved youth ministry. I was really amazed when God called me to preach, because it's just different. It's just, you can tell I'm a little bit immature. I still really relate to the kids well in that way, and I loved that. But as we were doing youth ministry, from my personal experience, we run a church van for several years, brought kids to church, and they came 3 times a week, some of them. Some of them, they'd go, and we'd take an hour one way just to bring them to church. And they'd pile on that van, and we'd have to fight to keep them from jumping over the seats and just bouncing off the walls and just trying to keep them inside the building and keep them on the road. And we'd bring them to church 3 times a week. But from my personal experience, children that aren't brought to church and aren't taught those same truths at home rarely go on to serve God. They rarely do. Once in a while you'll see one that'll go. But if their parents or grandparents or whoever's taking care of them, if they don't take them to church and teach the same things at home, they don't think they're that important. And some of those parents, they were sending their kids to church 3 times a week. But they weren't following that for themselves. They weren't doing it for themselves. And so, if you wait till your children are grown, right, you wait till the devil's got a hold of them real good, well, that's a dangerous game, because you might not get them back. You might not get them back, and they grow up fast. Luke 8, one other text here in Luke 8. There was a man dying in Luke 8. Jesus is walking around teaching, healing on the way. In Luke chapter 8, there's a man here by the name of Jairus. Jairus is a ruler of a Jewish synagogue. He's a leader in a church, but the church doesn't really believe Jesus is the Messiah. And we see that all the time. There are churches around that they go through the motions of worship, but they don't identify Jesus as God. They don't identify Him as the only way to be saved. And so they're having a church service, but they're not necessarily saved. Right? And so Jairus fits that group, but he recognizes there's something about Jesus. And it's really humbling for him to come as a leader in that synagogue, to come to Jesus and ask for something. But he is desperate. He has a 12-year-old daughter at home. She's dying. She's dying. He comes. He falls at Jesus' feet, begs him to come and heal his 12-year-old daughter. 12-year-old daughter. And Jesus says, okay, let's go. We'll go to your house. As he's going, there are other people there that want to be healed. Some of you all know the story there. A woman had a blood issue there, and she's just spent all of her money on doctors, and it's not getting any better. And she says, if I can just get close enough to touch the hem of his garment, I know I can be healed. Right? And so they're walking to Jairus' house, and this woman beats through the crowd and pushing people out of the way the best she can. She gets up close enough, she touches Jesus' garment. As soon as she touches his garment, what happens to her? She's healed. Instantly healed. Right? Immediately Jesus stops, and he turns and he says, "Who touched me?" Right? Well, there's people touching him all over. Everybody's trying to get as close as they possibly can. They're all wanting something from him. And he says, no. Virtue's gone out of me. Somebody just got healed. Right? Somebody just got healed. And turns around. She's there. She's scared. Right? He has an interaction with her. Right? She's saved during the process. But while they're doing that, while he's dealing with other people, he's trying to get to Jairus' house. But he keeps getting interrupted. Right? And then somebody comes along from the house and says, "Jairus, don't even bother. Don't even bother. Don't trouble the master anymore. Your daughter's already dead. Right? It's over. Right? All hope's gone." Right? And Jesus says, No, that's not how it's going to be. Right? Let's go to the house. Let's see. Right? So he goes to the house there. He tells them, he says, it's okay. Right? She's just sleeping. Right? Just sleeping. Right? Well, they laughed at him. Oh, no. We know the difference between when somebody's dead and when they're sleeping. She's dead. Stopped breathing. Heart stopped beating. She's dead. Jesus there in Luke 8:54 and 55 says, "And he put them all out and took her by the hand and called, saying, Maid, arise. And her spirit came again, and she arose straightway, and he commanded to give her meat." Jesus brought her back to life. They were right. She was dead. Jesus brought her back to life. And what he was proving there is exactly what happens when a person gets saved. When you get saved, you trust God. You depend completely on him as your payment for sin in order to get to heaven. And eventually, we're still going to die. What God was proving there through Jesus is God raises us back to life, back to eternal life there. Right? And so, if we sin, we talked about this during Vacation Bible School, any sin. Doesn't have to be a big sin. Doesn't have to be like you murdered somebody like Moses did. Doesn't have to be anything that drastic. Any kind of sin. Just a little lie, right? A bad thought, right? Anything disqualifies us from earning our way to heaven. If you did one any time in your life, you're disqualified. And then you've got to have some kind of payment. Just like the Israelites had to kill that innocent lamb for the first Passover, Jesus would have to die to pay for our sins. Can't do it on your own. If you pay for your own sins, you have to go to a place the Bible calls hell. And you have to stay there forever. There's no chance of getting out past that point. So, God's give us the instructions from his word. But God doesn't force anybody to be saved. If you don't want to go to heaven, if you don't want to live forever, God's not going to force anybody. I'm not going to come back there and grab you by the hand and try to drag you down this aisle. Wouldn't do any good if we did. Wouldn't do any good if we did. But God offers it to us as a gift. He's paid for it, but the gift has to be accepted. If you've not accepted Jesus as your Savior this evening, won't you do that this evening? Sheila's going to come. You can stand to your feet if you would. Stand to your feet, bow your heads. Nobody looking around, eyes closed. Sheila's going to play just a verse or two of invitation. We're just going to offer this to you this evening. There's a way of escape. A way to escape punishment forever in hell. That's by trusting Jesus. Jesus lived a perfect life. He was God, born in human flesh. He lived a perfect life, though. Never once did he do anything wrong. And then he died for everybody else's sin. Anybody that accepts him, the payment is applied to their account. He took the punishment for us. But if you don't accept the gift, your account's still full. Every sin you've ever committed in your whole life, you'll spend eternity paying. If you'd like to be saved this evening, that's the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. I remember June 26, 1980. I was at Vacation Bible School. Thursday evening. the preacher offered an invitation much like this. And he says, if you'd like to be saved, if you'd like to know that you're on your way to heaven, would you come up here to the front and talk to me? And I did. I stepped out of that aisle. I walked to the front. He knelt down with me over here on the right-hand side. I remember it like it was yesterday. He asked me some questions. He said, do you know that you're a sinner? Do you know that you've done something wrong? I said, yes, I do. He said, the Bible tells us because of our sin, we deserve death. That's not just physical death, that's death in hell. He said, do you understand that? I said, yes, I do. He said, but Jesus died for you. Jesus shed His blood for you. And if you want to be saved, if you believe in Him, you can be saved. He said, do you want that? I said, yes, I do. And I prayed right there on the front altar. I said, God, please save me. I don't deserve that. But I appreciate that you died for me, and I don't want to go to hell. I want to go to heaven when I die. And I prayed there on that front pew Thursday evening. And God changed my life. You're different on the inside. When I stood up from that altar, I looked exactly the same on the outside as I did when I knelt down. But God changed me. If you'd like to be saved this evening, you want God to change you, want God to save you, you want to be in heaven, won't you come? Won't you come and I'll pray with you? Anybody at all, young or old,